What?
Right, just so you know, I've just pressed record, so everything that you say from now on can and will be held against you.
Yeah.
In the court of wine. When we start, what I would like to know is just what you have. Has everybody got rosé?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh. Ah, lovely. This is what we like from Andrew there. If you could hold up your bottle or your glass so I can see, and if you could sort of tell me what it is that you have, then that will help me know what.
I've got the same one. He's got the same as me. He's a cat.
Oh yeah, a Bandal I can see, a nice Provence-y one, lovely South Africa.
Yeah, ours is, we haven't got the bottle, but
Yours is New Zealand, isn't it?
from New Zealand, this is.
Oh, and that Anjou. Oh, so that one's going to be a nice
Rosé d'Anjou.
one.
Yeah, we've got a bottle of Rosé d'Anjou in the fridge.
Well, we should have that.
Oh, a Cabernet.
You said to have the
as
posh
well.
one.
Oh, yeah.
Is it the posh one?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Oh, we've got a good variety.
Yeah, Ruth, we've got it. Is Gary here? I haven't seen Gary
is
come
getting
on.
drunk.
Yes, yeah, he's here.
Going on to that one.
Yeah, I think we have everybody here, Dad, so it's all good.
It's Gary, Ruth. I haven't seen Gary's name come.
Yeah, he's there.
Yeah.
He's waving at you.
I'm here.
Heard his voice.
No.
Terry, you're on screen. What happened to your picture?
What,
You're on
darling?
screen. Terry, you're on screen. What's going on? Oh, there you are.
I'm here, but
Yeah.
I can't see
Hi.
anybody.
Yeah.
We can
I'm
see
here,
you,
but I
Terry.
can't.
Oh, Tony's disappeared.
Right, okay, so we're going to take control of this madness, and I'm going to mute you all,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to
Good
talk to you
idea.
about wine, whether you like it or not. Okay.
Hey, good one.
Wine. I'm in the wrong group.
Okay, so you do all have the power to unmute yourselves. So I'm not being too draconian about this. So if you really want to, then you can interject, especially if you don't have the chat option. Like I said, the chat option is on my computer anyway. It's a little button at the bottom of the screen. And what if you click it, it will bring up a little thing to the side of the screen where you can type in any questions and see anything that anyone else has written. It also won't appear on the video, so you can write whatever you like there, just to make it not too offensive to me. Perfect. I'm going to talk about rosé, and then if you have any questions, I can answer them. And then after I've done my spiel, then we can just open up the chat a bit more, and I'll unmute you all anyway. Lovely. So, cheers. Marvelous. So, yes, delicious. Rosé is the name we commonly give to all pink wines. The colour comes from the skin in a grape. So, what I thought I would do is buy a packet of grapes and really take this down to the basics. So this is a grape. We've all seen a grape before. This is a standard black grape. There are some grapes that differ to this style of grape, but the vast majority of black grapes have colour in the skin on the outside, but they do not have colour on the inside. So if you were to peel the skin off a grape, it looks like this. And this is from the same packet of grapes as this grape. So this is very clear pulp. I think we can see very clear. You can see the remnants of the skin there. This is how colourful the skin is. So this is where the colour comes from. If you were to just eat the skin on its own, and I can tell you I've done this frequently with my students, it tastes quite bitter. This is where the tannin comes from in red wine. Tannin is something that is quite drying and quite bitter to taste. It's also where some of the other flavours that you get, especially in more powerful wines, come from. But the pulp part here, this is essentially mostly just going to be sugar, acidity, and water. So the sugar is what is going to become the alcohol. You will get some flavour from this because the fermentation will make it, but essentially this is just, I mean, I can eat a bit of it. It's delicious. It's refreshing and it's very sweet. Whereas if you just eat a bit of a black grape, it's much more balanced and much more flavorful. And I recommend you do that next time you have some grapes, because it really does help you understand like the structure of wine and how it's made up. I thought what I would try and do is do a little experiment for you. And so I peeled some of the grapes earlier and put them in some hot water. You might be able to see some of the colour has come out. I did this a bit earlier, and you stir it about. You see there is a little bit of colour coming out there. So this is a little bit of time that the skins of the grapes have been in this water, and then just a little bit of colour. It's not the same though. Apparently it will behave differently in acid, and grape juice, wine is acidic, so we have to add a bit of acidity to it. This should change the colour again, hopefully. Oh yeah, so you can see you get more of that kind of pink colour coming because we've changed the pH of the liquid. That is what you're going to get from your pink wine. So if you were to leave these grapes in this liquid, these grape skins essentially, in this liquid for 3 weeks, and it was nice and warm for those 3 weeks, you're going to end up with a deeply coloured opaque red wine. But, well, not wine, because this is water we're dealing with, and it hasn't got any sugar in it. So it's actually that, ignore that whole thing. It's just going to be deep red in colour. But because we've only done it for the last few hours, it's actually just pink. So that is rosé, essentially. It's what could be a red wine, but we haven't let the skin be in contact with the juice for long enough for it to be red. So it's only pink. There are other important differences as well, and that is the temperature that you're going to ferment the juice at, because if you want a red wine, you're going to ferment it at a temperature that's quite high, and that's going to get all the colour and all the tannin out of the juice, out of the skins rather, but it's going to create lots of heavy, more savoury flavours that you might not necessarily want. Whereas if you are trying to make a nice, delicate, fruity, fresh rosé wine, then you're going to treat it like it's a white wine. And if you're making a white wine, what you do is ferment it at a lower temperature. Does that make sense? Just nod if that makes sense. Good. It's really unnerving having you all on mute, so I might just unmute you for a bit anyway, just for my own, settle my own nerves. So what we're talking about is the colour compounds, so anthocyanins. These happen to be the same sort of compounds that you get in all kinds of different purple vegetables and fruits. They're very good for you, supposedly. And yeah, the colours, as you can see, the colour is not stable. The colour will change with different environments. So that was just the colour change from changing the pH over time. The colour will change as well. So a wine that will start off when it's young, quite pink, is actually then going to become more and more orange over time. So we start off describing them as pink wines, and then they start to become more salmon coloured. And then if it's a little bit more mature, then we start calling that onion skin, which is my favourite. I really like that because I like the colour of onion skin. Some people just refer to it as orange, but onion skin sounds nicer, I think. It's a better colour. Yes, I might just unmute you all now and ask if anybody has any questions about that, and then we'll move on to the next bit. Ooh.
What about, isn't there 3 ways to make a rosé, Ruth? There's the bleeding, the blend, and the third one, which I'm not sure. But we're going to get to that, aren't we?
That is the next bit. That's an excellent
You and your bleeding
segue. Could you ask
rosé.
that again in about 5 minutes? That would be
Okay. Who are?
He's been on
We have
Google
got a
all
question
day.
from Roz, says, pale pink is often more delicate flavour. How does quality change with colour? Aha, so.
That's from me, by the way.
Oh, very good, excellent. It just came from Roz's iPad.
We can't see this.
The quality doesn't necessarily change with the colour, so to speak. However, I would say that people, the paler kinds of rosé tend to produce higher level of prestige. The more deeply coloured pink wines, as an average, tend to be the cheaper styles. So if you take, for example, White Zinfandel, which is a pink wine from California, some people might have come across it. It tastes a lot like Ribena It's made so it's quite deeply pink. It's quite sweet, it's quite low in alcohol, and yeah, it does just taste like tinned strawberries. That's considered to be a bit lower quality because it only really has one flavour, and that's quite deep in colour. A lot of people aren't mad keen on it because it's quite sweet and it's not particularly well balanced with acidity with that. So it's it's a bit cloying.
I used to like it when I was young.
Yeah, I call it the gateway wine. Like
Amongst other
luring your
things.
sort of
This is
18-year-old
what we term
girls.
at the park wine.
Yeah. But it's okay, it's acceptable. It's like if wine was an alcopop, that is what it would be. But it's sort of okay because it's lower in alcohol as well. And that's why it's sweet, is because they stopped the fermentation early, so it's got sweetness there instead of alcohol. So it's
lower in alcohol.
Okay.
it's not as, it's not as bad as it sounds, really.
So are the pale wines more expensive generally?
They often are. So the pale wines especially frequently will come from Provence. So Provence is a region in France, in the south of France, which is really famous for its pink wines. I'll talk some more about that later anyways. But this is a region which specialises just in rosé, and it does make some other wines as well, but its real speciality is rosé, and it's a dry, delicate, more complex style. So people tend to, you know, fork out more money for that, even though whether it's really worth more money is up to you. But it's certainly a much more fashionable style of rosé. The style that you're drinking, I think, Ros and Ted, that is probably, I don't know if it says on it, but it might be a Sauvignon blend. The ones from
Is that a Sauvignon Blanc?
Yeah, Sauvignon Blanc, yeah.
Ours is Merlot.
So Sauvignon Blanc tends to be a bit more expensive anyway, especially New Zealand Sauvignon. And what they've done is they've just blended in a tiny little bit of red wine into it, so that just softens the flavours and gives it a nice colour. So essentially they've cashed in on the fact that lots of people love Sauvignon Blanc and that pink wine is nice as well. So that's why it's a bit more expensive as well, because it's like they don't make cheap wine in New Zealand.
No,
That's just blended, is it? They just mix the two wines together and that's the blend?
Yeah, you're not really allowed to do that in Europe,
No.
apart from in Champagne unusually, but you're allowed to do that in other parts of the world.
Oh.
And it seems to be something that they really like to do in New Zealand more than other places.
Interesting.
Cool.
Now New Zealand are good at everything now.
They are.
We love New Zealand now.
Oh, yeah.
So
Especially Jacinda, or whatever her name is.
Oh,
yeah. Basically,
we'll just move to New Zealand when all this is done. We're all going to New Zealand.
Yeah.
we're all
gonna
moved
go
to
there.
New Zealand.
Oh, we have a message from Kim as well, a question. We don't get much onion skin orange wine in this country, but a friend of a friend is making it in Romania. Why don't we get this as much in the UK? So I think this is referring to two separate things. So onion skin wine is, in that sense, is talking about orange wine, and that is orange wine that is made, that's not a process of aging pink wines. That is the process of making a red wine style white wine. That makes sense. So when I was talking about the different fermentation temperatures that you would do for pink wine or white wine versus red wine, that's one of the many different things that you would treat differently when you're looking at red wine or white wine in terms of the fermentation process. If you're making an orange wine, or in that sense an onion skin wine, then what you're doing is you're treating a white wine as if it was a red wine, basically. That's oversimplifying it.
So a white wine with a hotter fermentation
temperature, yes. So
okay,
it'll be a warmer temperature. They'll be using the skins in the process. You know, often there'll be white grapes as well. And it's generally a more rustic, more traditional way of having produced it. They wouldn't be doing anything in like stainless steel temperature controlled tanks or anything like that, which is what most pink wine is made like.
So can I ask about sparkling pink and pink champagne?
Yes.
Are they made differently from ordinary sparkling wine?
They are. Okay, so this is going to bring us back to, was it Clive who asked earlier about who asked about that, about the different methods of making pink wine? But this brings us nicely into that. So Right, I might just mute you all just quickly for this. Hang on a moment. Okay, so there are three main ways. We have looked at one way, and that is the blending. So blending, you would take a very small amount of red wine and you would blend it in with white grape, with the white wine, and then you will produce a pink wine. You can very closely therefore control what colour your wine is going to be. And because you get that extra element of control about the colour, they actually allow you to do that in champagne. So most pink champagnes are made by blending like just a tiny little bit of Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier in with their white wine that they've made separately. And the reason for that is champagne is all about non-vintage, so producing the same thing over and over and over again, no matter what year it is. But most wines, they make it 1 year and then they'll finish making that year and they'll sell that year and then they'll put year on the label. And then the next year they'll be selling a different product, but it's probably pretty similar, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. So most European rosé production, and certainly all European still rosé production, is produced in one of two separate ways. So the first one is called saignée, which we already mentioned earlier, which is the bleeding method. And the other one is just called direct pressing. Direct pressing will give you a wine like this sort of Provence style, very light pink rosé, which I think a few people have had when you held that up earlier. It's very much a fashionable style. They'll often come in clear glass bottles, so people will be able to see how pale the colour of the pink wine is on the shelf, because some people literally will be picking their pink wine on the basis of it being as pale as possible. This wine is made by direct pressing. When we do that, what we do is to get the juice out of the grape. Obviously, we start off with the grape. We've got juice here, but it's all inside the skin, so you can't turn that into wine yet. So you have to crush it and then press all the juice out of it. The pressing process for pink wines and white wines especially is quite a delicate process, and it's done gently and over a few hours frequently, sometimes less than that, but usually between like 2 and 4 hours this process will take for them to gently squish all the juice out of the grapes. And during that process, you're going to get, if you're using red grapes or black grapes, then you're going to get some colour out of the skin, but not very much. And that's the direct pressing method. That's how this is made. That is done in Provence. It's done in places where they are specialising in producing pink wines of this light, delicate, fresh, dry, usually, style. Another way that is very common around the world, very frequently found in the Rhone or in parts of Spain, for example, is the saignée method. And the saignée method, it translates as bleeding, is often a process whereby you might be making two different wines. So you'll be making a pink wine, and then you'll be making a red wine. If you have your kilogram of grapes or whatever, and you squish the grapes and you leave the grapes for an hour, 3 hours, maybe a day, the juice is going to be in contact with the skin, so therefore it's going to pick up colour from those skins, and it's going to get deeper and deeper in colour, as this is getting deeper and deeper in colour all the time. Then what you could do is bleed off. Say I bled off from this like a third of the juice, say a third of the liquid. I've now got a pink wine, lovely. That's the bleeding off, that's the saignée process. But then I've still got so much colour. I can still see the colour in those skins. They're still like black grape skins to my eyes. So I know there's loads of colour and tannin and stuff left, and flavour left in those skins. So then I leave it like that overnight. The juice that remains is going to be much deeper in colour. It's going to have much more tannin, and it's going to have a lot more flavour. So if you're making a red wine, that wine that you're then making is going to be really loads more ageable, potentially higher quality, and just essentially more valuable to sell. So that's another process. So it could be that you could look at it as you're making two products, or it could be that you're looking at it as the pink wine is literally just the byproduct of making a better wine elsewhere, but it's now come into its heyday and people love pink wine, so it's an extra bonus. Does that make sense? Cool. Now we have another question from Nikki. Okay, so what's the best region for rosé wine in Europe? Now that is very much a personal preference thing. I think I'm a massive fan of Provence rosé, so I really like that style, and I really like the sort of light, delicate, dry style. But I also really like some of the pink wines you get from Spain, which again, it's the same grape. Well, there's different grapes that go into Provence and stuff, but there's an overlap, and that is the grape Garnacha or Grenache in France, and it makes lovely, nice pink wines, really nice sort of raspberry, strawberry kind of flavours to them, and often quite dry as well. There's a lovely rosé from Rioja called Muga, M-U-G-A, which I really recommend. I think it's delicious. Normally about £12, but it is really nice. Or another region that it's a little bit more touch and go is the Loire. Now the Loire, there's a huge amount of rosé, and they do it such varying quality levels. So you have Rosé d'Anjou, which can be nice, but also can be really churned out. So that's the one to be a little bit wary of. Then you have Cabernet d'Anjou, which is considered to be higher quality. It's just made from the Cabernet grape, so Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon. But that's often sweet, so only go for that one if you like sweeter wines. And then the drier version, which is the Rosé de Loire, which is always going to be dry. So that's a safer one if you're not into your sweet wines. But it's definitely worth getting to know the wines of the Loire if you have the time and the inclination and the opportunity to taste them all. But it can be, if you're in a shop and there's only one from each of the regions, which is often the case in, say, an English supermarket, the safer bet is often, in my experience, to go for the Provence one, because you're almost guaranteed of a style. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Right. Kim says, do tannins preserve the wine? Yes, they do. Tannins come out of the skin. They come out during the fermentation process later on than the colour starts to come out. So first of all, you start off with the fermentation. The temperature will come up because some fermentation, it creates the alcohol, but it also creates heat, along with other things as well. But that heat will then, like using hot water to get colour and flavour out of a tea bag, you're going to get more as it heats up. So the colour will start to come out faster. And then as the alcohol starts to get higher and higher, that's when it's going to start sucking out the tannin. So it starts to dissolve the tannins higher then. So that's why you don't get tannin in a pink wine very much at all. But in a red wine, it can be very noticeable. And that's one of the reasons why red wines can age for so much longer than most pink wines can, because pink wines really they're mostly just designed to be drank young. I don't think I've ever come across one that I've been persuaded is really designed to be laid down in the cellar or anything like that. Cool. We have another question from Roz, which is, or maybe Ted, from Roz's iPad. What is the most expensive rosé? So the one that Brad and Angelina makes is pretty expensive. That's a Provence rosé. I think they're going around about £25, £30 a bottle. So you get, that's not as expensive as some celebrity wines are. Then you get wine regions like Tavel, which is in the Rhone, Tavel, and that is known for producing arguably the most ageable of the rosés, from Grenache mostly, very much a darker style of a pink wine, much more flavoursome. And so if you get a chance to taste one of those, it's nice. But because rosé tends to not be a wine designed for aging, and therefore it's not a wine that you would like buy to cellar and save and for a special occasion. It's a wine to be drunk that year, potentially, usually, or within 2 or 3 years. It will never command a huge price. It will only command what the market will, allow, given its popularity. So hence Brad and Angelina. It doesn't, I mean, obviously they bought a nice chateau, but they will add so much extra value to that wine just because it's a fashion statement, basically. Cool. And then Gary says, what about the Lidl region? I think that's probably many people's favourite region. £2.47 a bottle. Right, we'll have to unmute you. Gary, is this what you're drinking here?
No, I'm drinking the Bandol actually, but
very nice.
But the little rosé is seems to be excellent. I mean, for €2.47, it's
It's £2.47 a bottle. Is that right?
Euros 47, €2.
€2.47. Okay, so in
virtually
England,
the same
that
now,
would
isn't
be
it?
probably
Well,
like £6 or something.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
But yeah, Lidl was just really good value for money.
Can we just get it?
We've got the Andrew, which just says there's a cheaper one.
Oh, that is a nice cat.
We got our Provence from Lidl for €5, and that's really good.
Sorry.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
They
the
do good
Bandol
wine.
was only £6, so it's not too bad. I mean, it's nice. Seems to be a nice wine.
It sounds nice. Bandol tends to be nice. There's some other wines that I should mention as well, as in for nice ones, is that you can come across an Italian wine called Chiaretto. Have you heard of this? Come across that?
No.
It's essentially, it's Italian for the word claret, which you might hear people talking about from Bordeaux.
Yeah.
But the word from Bordeaux comes from this style of early to drink light red that's almost pink that the Bordeaux used to produce, which is sort of like their equivalent to Beaujolais Nouveau or something, just something easier to drink that you don't have to age before you drink it. And so the same word is translated into Italy called Chiaretto. And if you come across that, it's normally from northern Italy, and it's quite a flavoursome, quite a heavy style. That could be worth checking out if you like rosé wine. Let me think.
Does anyone remember Matus rosé?
Oh yeah. Apparently, that was Jimi Hendrix's favourite wine. So there you go.
Wasn't that more of a buffet?
Very good, Father. Very good.
What rosé would you recommend filling a bathtub with, Ruth?
For what purposes? Is this for charity purposes, or because you're going to drink it all whilst you're sitting in it?
Any purposes.
Any purposes. I think I would go for Lidl, €2. Quite possibly.
How big is the bathtub?
How clean is the bath is a very important question. It's worrying if it's more clean after you've poured the wine into it. Yeah. Anything, you don't want it dissolving anything, do you? So the cat is liking its rosé as well, is it, Nikki?
Yeah, she's got very discerning tastes.
Is rosé more fashionable at the moment? Why is it more fashionable?
Oh God, you sounded as though you all got
Okay, right, you're all muted. Don't know what went on there with the microphones, but something went awry. So it's really fashionable at the moment, I think, because of the way the wine fashions work. You mentioned Mateus Rosé earlier, and it is a joke now. People laugh about it. People laugh about Blue Nun, they laugh about Mateus, they laugh about Liebfraumilch. But at the time, that was the height of sophistication. That was what people were drinking, and that was almost, not. You wouldn't have been drinking that if you were the queen, but you would have been drinking that, amongst feeling quite happy about it amongst social circles and stuff. And that's because that was what people liked drinking, that suited the style. at the minute, what's happened is we've gone through a process, and different groups have gone through this in different rates, but people moved away from the sweet wines. A lot of them moved into the very fruity wines and the oakier wines like Chardonnay. Especially if you're someone who would be more of a white or rosé drinker anyway, this is the sort of path that people's tastes have taken. And then people moved away from the oakiness after a while of the 80s and 90s of a lot of bad Chardonnays and overly oaked and too low in acidity wines being produced. Then the fashion sort of moved away from that style and into much more neutral, lighter style. So the much more neutral, lighter style fits in with wines like Pinot Grigio. And people then eventually get a bit bored of Pinot Grigio because it doesn't taste of huge amount, it's fine, but it doesn't taste of anything really. It's just like a nice, refreshing, light wine. And so people then move to slightly more flavoursome things, but still dry. So most people prefer a drier style. And then you have people going down to, especially what you would call, say, like not before the age of Instagram and the internet and stuff, there were still influences. There were still people who had a big influence on the styles of food and wine that people went for. Say people like Jamie Oliver had a big influence, but people who had a bit of money, upper middle class people who would then set what was the next trend, if you like. People that would be going on holiday to Italy, they'd be going on holiday to the south of France, and they'd be having these styles of wine. So therefore you have an increase in the love of things like Prosecco from Italy, and you have a love of things like the pink wines of South France, which people are drinking on holiday. And so it just sort of feeds back in, and you have one person coming back to England and sort of saying how much they love pink wine, and all of a sudden this thing that's been a bit of a social pariah for a while because of Mateus back in the day, and people equating pink wines with all being like that Californian white Zinfandel, and not really realizing that dry and higher quality pinks exist. All of a sudden it becomes a big thing to be like, oh, actually, well, I do like rosé, don't you know? And that then you create a whole new wave of fashion. So it's one of those things. It will eventually it will probably go out of fashion. People will dislike Prosecco, people will not drink Sauvignon Blanc anymore, that kind of thing will happen, but at the minute it's flying high, it's doing well, so it's riding the wave, if you like. Ooh, we got Kim, we like rosé, good. Tom wants to pull the plug out of the bar. So I'm going to unmute you all now. There we go.
like rosé.
Everybody's microphones calm down.
What food is it best, Matt? You mentioned barbecue. Can you be a bit more specific about the food that it goes well with?
Yes, so I would not, obviously rosé covers a wide variety of things. I wouldn't really be pairing those sweeter ones with food necessarily. Maybe some of the sweeter wines from the Loire could, because they've got higher acidity level. If it's a sweeter one, I'd probably say spicier, potentially spicier food. But your standard rosé, normally if you're making a pink wine, you're going to pick the grapes earlier. So
hello, Frida.
Red wine.
Sorry, we're
Cat intermission there.
Cat intermission.
We are listening, Ruth, we promise.
Just have a little musical interlude with everybody. I can't remember. Oh yes. Oh yeah. But because most pink wines are higher in acidity because the grapes are picked earlier, and they have no tannin, but they've got a bit of flavour to them. They do pair with quite a wide variety of different foods, and that's why I say something like a barbecue. They work nicely because you don't just have one thing. It's the one meal where, apart from maybe Christmas dinner, where you're probably, if you're a meat eater, you're probably going to have like 3 different types of meat, which you wouldn't normally do. So you're not really pairing with one thing. What's that, Ted?
I'm eating 3 meats on a Christmas dinner, but
yeah,
so barbecue.
But does that answer that question? So it's just good. It doesn't particularly pair amazingly well with one thing, but it does pair pretty well with a variety.
Yeah. Ding dong. And what is your ultimate recommendation? What would you say is the best rosé to have?
In your opinion?
In my opinion, yeah, it's all about opinion. You're absolutely right. So I mean,
Little.
If it's about quantity, it sounds like that little one's good. I really, really rate that rosé. I was talking about the Muga one from Spain. I really like that. I mean, if you really want to know what my personal favourite pink wine is, it would be a variety of different pink champagnes, but I think that's sort of cheating a little bit. There is there's, in the style of the sort of there's a really nice one from Provence called Minuti, like minute with a Y on the end, and there's Mirabelle. There's some really nice light ones from Provence as well. But yeah, I'd say if you're spending £12 on a bottle of rosé, you're probably going to be drinking something a bit special.
Right.
Yeah, it's because they don't really cost a huge amount of money. Whereas, so yeah, they're pretty safe. Anything over, £8 is pretty safe with a bottle of rosé.
Yeah, they definitely seem to be cheap. It seems to be cheaper buying rosé generally. Maybe it's just the type of rosé that I buy, but it definitely they seem cheaper than say a good white. Is that right?
I think yes. Yeah, if you're going to spend like money on a nice white, like a prestigious white, then you could be looking at something like Sancerre or Burgundy or something, and then you're really paying for the name of the place, with a huge amount of demand on it. Whereas you could get good wines for just as cheap as you can get a good rosé, but you don't have the same level of prestige on the region as much. So maybe Provence might be the most prestigious area for it that's widely available. But even there, you're normally looking at about £10 a bottle.
That's interesting. So it's quite a good buy. If you want a good buy and you want to be kind of economical, actually, rosé's a bit of a good buy.
It can be, yeah, but it can also be a bit of a pitfall because you could, if you're like, if you don't
fall
like
into a
the
bathtub
lighter styles, the sweeter styles, then you could end up with a wine that you don't like.
That horrible one that you described that was bright pink and sweet.
Yeah, the white Zinfandel.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some fairly bad examples of that, and they do just taste like tinned strawberry if you get a good one.
Is that the Jimi Hendrix one?
The Jimi Hendrix is the Mateus Rosé. That's actually surprisingly okay. It's got a bad name and it's got a terrible bottle, but it's surprisingly okay.
So that's the weird sort of circular bottle.
Yeah,
the one you've shown.
Like that. But sort of
very famous. Very famous to people my age.
Hey Joe, where you going?
It's Rebecca's favourite from the mine.
Jimi Hendrix. I'm like, well, if it's good enough for Hendrix, I think next week.
He was probably called Heavy Mateus in his day.
Didn't it have like netting times?
No, that was something else. There was one with a little basket. That's the red one. Chianti.
Oh yeah, they used to sell Chianti in that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Then they called it Fiasco, I think. Like,
Fiasco.
Fiasco, yeah.
So that's what this is, Ruth.
I think it literally just translates as flask rather than actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a fiasco of Chianti. That was actually.
Do you get more hungover or less hungover with rosé?
Oh, right.
We need to know. We have another bottle.
Your mother needs to know.
I think it has lower alcohol than red wines, so probably slightly less, but it's probably slightly easier to drink than red wine.
More of it.
Yeah.
More of it.
Exactly. So,
Mary, is that true, Mary?
Sorry? It's the same hangover.
I said, Mary, is that true?
What was that, Tim?
No, it's Gary.
Oh, was it Gary?
Gary asking Mary if it's true.
I'm on there.
I can drink more rosé than I can drink red, that's for sure.
2 glasses then.
He does.
2.5 glasses.
From a woman of experience.
I think this is quite all right. It's quite strong.
I emptied 3 dustbins of the Les Lard bottle the other day, and I would say 50% of it was rosé.
Oh no. Was it meant to be rosé?
That was just mine.
Oh, you emptied the bottle. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I can't hear more.
Sorry. So I think we're struggling to get Tim and Liz and Tony.
Yeah, we
Oh,
can't see their pictures. Yeah.
You have
And
to slide
Tom.
over it.
We haven't heard from Tom. I think he might have drunk a bottle or 2 by now.
He looks
That's a bit rude.
Are you there?
Speak, Tom.
Yay!
Oh,
That's true.
Oh, there he is.
There he is.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm barbecuing. I got
Liking
to
the beard.
This was barbecue. I'm the only one outside, I think.
No.
No.
Oh, that's Victoria.
It is stormy here in France, so I think we are
Oh,
struggling.
is it? Or maybe it's to do with that. Oh,
Yeah.
Kim says there's some lovely great stone walls in the background. Yes, she's noticed.
I'm jealous. I mean, I'm not jealous.
They do come.
We're all a bit jealous.
Sharon says, yeah.
You get my lovely
We wish we were locked down.
Yeah.
So, what else? I wanted to tell you a few other bits as well. I did write down some things. So Provence is the oldest wine region in France. So they know that they were making a wine there before the Romans got there. The Phocians, someone might have a better pronunciation of that than me, but they're a Greek tribe, if you like, did land in Provence, and they set up Marseille. And they were making wines before anywhere else in mainland France. I mean, they were making wines in Corsica. Corsica before Provence, but at that time Corsica wasn't French, so it doesn't. No, that doesn't count. So it's got the longest history of all of them.
What were they called, Ruth? Sorry, I'll probably look it up on Wikipedia later.
So what I'll do, I'll just type it in the thing.
According to Wikipedia, we've got Ruth. We've got Ruth.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think that's how you spell it.
Croatian.
I think I just sent that weirdly. I just managed to just send that to Roz. Hang on, everyone. That's favouritism, isn't it?
That's no good. She can't read.
I'll tell you, but I'll only tell Roz.
Phoenicians. Yes, Phoenicians.
And Roz is going to act it out for you with charades, and then you're going to know.
I think it's Phoenician.
They were the first, and that spelling might be.
I'm afraid I haven't got my toga.
Yeah, sounds like a sort of Photoshop app or something. The plugin for Photoshop.
The Phocians, what they are. They definitely were making wine, and they were definitely, doing great viticulture and selecting grapes. We know that they were controlling how the vines were grown. You can't make proper wine unless you are having some control over the vines and being quite selective about how you make it with an intention of making good quality grapes for wine.
Did they make the first rosé then?
Well, we don't know that. What we do know is that by the time the Romans got there, and the Romans actually gave them the name, so that Provence wasn't called Provence when they landed, but it was the first province outside of Italy that the Romans took over. And so they called it Nostra Provincia, which just means our province, their first one overseas. And so that's where the name Provence comes from.
Do we know what year that was? Because I don't know my history.
Exporting was mostly rosé. So most of what the Romans liked to get from Provence and take back to Rome, well, Italy, was pink wine. We know that, but then we know it was also scuppered because then the Romans got a bit protective about their markets and stuff, because I think it was getting a bit popular, and so people were like, no, now we're going to stop you exporting it. So it definitely was pink back then. That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know about the fusions, however we.
So there are no vintage pinks that have been lying around for a couple of 100 years then?
Well, I'm sure there are. I don't know how nice they're going to be. They could be some lovely vintage pink coloured. But yeah, I mean, it would be. It wouldn't have the tannin, and it won't. It will be a weird pale brown colour now. If it was
pale brown.
like if you chopped an apple in half and it goes brown, that essentially is what will happen to the wine eventually. All wine is going brown.
A bit like the rest of us.
Pardon?
A bit like the rest of us.
Yes.
A bit brown in the end.
We're all slowly turning into a sort of tawny
brown.
Gonna happen. But yeah. So we know that, and we know they've been making pink wine there for longer than we know for certain at the moment that we've been making pink wine anywhere else. So that's why I learned the most about the history of Provence for this. But if anybody has any questions about other places, I may or may not know. Does anyone have any other questions about?
Anything sensible?
Oh, Nikki does.
That was Terry, I think, for a minute.
Let Tim speak.
Oh,
I think
let Tim speak. What was that?
Tim? Terry?
Terry, no?
Or Terry?
Can't hear anybody.
I said, have that bit of chorizo.
Oh. It was important. We knew it was important, and it was worth it.
And
the other day, I was having salami with the pink. I had to test it before today, so just to make sure that it was okay. And I had it with some salami, and it was amazing.
English rosé. Is there much English rosé?
Yes, I would say pink wine is one of the things we make the best. We're not very good at red wine. Please don't drink English red wine. I had a Cabernet Sauvignon from near Gloucester once.
Oh yeah, I mean, no.
Really, but we need to support local. We need to support local, don't we? I mean,
support your local white and pink wine production.
White and pink wine only.
Sparkling is our best, but it's quite expensive.
I bought some sparkling at Gloucester Services and it was very tart.
Yeah, so cool climate makes high acid wine, so it's very
okay. Gloucester Services is a world-renowned
it is!
wine station.
Oh, well, maybe not.
Could you put it in your fuel? Will it make a good fuel supplement?
I don't. No comment. No.
It'd be even more expensive than petrol, I think. But yeah, we're not the cheapest winemaking region, but you know, we're getting better. And the pink wines, I think, are some we make quite nice sort of dry, light, delicate pinks that kind of are quite pale, like this kind of style. So I would recommend some of those. I've had some really nice ones. Some of the whites I've had are a little bit tasteless. Some of them are nice, but you know, some of them are, just considering you're paying like £11-12 almost as a minimum, they're not value for money. Whereas some of the pink ones, you might be paying that amount for that style of wine anyway. And then the sparkling wines again are quite expensive, but they are good. I mean, cool climates are best.
Stay away from Australian rosés; they're horrible.
The Australian which ones?
Rosés, they're awful.
Yeah, I think there'll be parts of Australia that can pull off pink wine, but it's a little bit like a light style of white. You don't want to get that from a cool climate. I mean, from a hot climate. A hot climate is really a place where you want to be looking more for your red wines or your big, heavy white.
I would never, because you drink what I want to drink white wine when I'm somewhere that's hot.
Yeah, red wine seems like a drink I drink more in winter, and white wine and rosé would be summer, but they're reversed in how they're produced, which is weird.
Well, if you go to like places like Sicily, if you buy wines from Sicily, they can be quite big and powerful. But if you go to Sicily, all the wine you can buy there is sort of almost pink and in a fridge. It's not, you know, what they're exporting is often not what they're drinking. But in Australia, actually, weirdly, they're drinking really heavy reds in Australia, which I can never really.
They're stubborn. They're very stubborn.
Very stubborn people.
What about South Africa? How do they stack up?
Well, in South Africa, what they've done is they've quite carefully chosen grape varieties that have high acidity even in hot climates. So that's why you get like Chenin Blanc, and have you heard of the grape that they grow there called Pinotage? And that
I'll pretend that I know that.
You're like, yeah, that's what I was thinking of, Ruth. Yeah.
I was thinking about that grape the other day.
They like genetically engineered it. So like they crossed Cinsault, which is a southern French hardy grape, with Pinot Noir, which is a high acidity grape, in order to try and create a hardy version of Pinot Noir. But it didn't really work. They created something that tastes like hard. They drink it anyway. It's got high acidity. But yeah, they plant grapes specifically to make them drinkable. But if you look at South Africa, the vast majority of the wine they make is exported. It's not affordable to a lot of the people. Yeah. So in Australia, I think a lot of people are just drinking beer. In California, it gets quite hot, but they love a bit of Pinot Noir and the lighter styles there too. Yeah. I think a lot of places where it's really hot, a lot of it is for export.
Yeah.
Where did Tom go? Did he go outside? Looks like it's a picture of his barn or something.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of it, like coming in and out of different. Oh, we have another question. Which regions of the UK are making rosé? Mostly the south. So Kent, Sussex. And parts of Wales and Cornwall are as well, but generally the south.
He's out in the barn.
Then we have, what does the word gris mean in relation to rosé wine? The one we're drinking tonight is gris, whereas we've seen other wines with gris appended to the name. Okay, so that's from so gris literally translates as grey, and what it will normally refer to is the name of a grape. So you get, for example, Pinot Gris or Sauvignon Gris. Pinot Gris is probably the most famous, and it's the same grape as Pinot Grigio, but Grigio is just Italian for grey. And you can get what we call a blush, a very light pale pink out of a Gris wine. You're never going to make that into a red wine because it's not like a black grape. It's not like heavily pigmented like this. If you were to look at it, it would look like a nice pink colour on the grape, which doesn't really make anything beyond quite a pale pink wine, but it does very easily make a white wine. So what a lot of the grey grapes will go into production of either white wine, or in case of like Loire wines, there'll be a lot of gris wines that go into a blend for the rosé potentially as well. It could mean anything that refers to grey in any way, because there's not a legal description of it apart from the fact that it's normally referring to a grape wine.
Blend seems like cheating.
What's that? Blending seems like cheating.
Sorry, I thought we were muted.
No,
it's not really cheating. It's more to do with adding extra
That's all I said. It was on point. So that's
it might. It's sort of is cheating, but the idea is to cheat your way to a better wine. So it's like, yeah.
The blending is okay. Blending, you're fine with the blend.
Blending's fine, especially, well, yeah, people talk about blends being bad, and they're thinking of it being like people talk about blended whiskey as being bad, so it gets a bad name from then. But also, if you talk about a blend from a wide area, so for example, a lot of cheap wines from Australia are just labelled as Southeastern Australia. And that means that it's come from pretty much somewhere the size of Western Europe within Australia. So that is not going to be a wine that is interesting, and it's going to be a wine that is about producing something that's bulk for the bulk market. That's reliable.
Probably served in a box, in a sort of silver thing. Yeah. It's
probably advertised in the middle of Friends or something like Jacob's Creek, or that kind of thing. It's like huge market for it. They've got a big budget to push it because it's going to be available everywhere, but it's not going to be your best wine. So when you're talking about a blend over a big area, that's what we mean is bad. Whereas a blend between different grape varieties is, Champagne is a blend of different grapes. Bordeaux is always a blend of different grapes. Chateauneuf de Pape can be 13 different grapes, and there's a lot of different grapes in some of the top wines.
I love a
Chateauneuf
de Pape.
You love a Chateauneuf. You've got expensive taste, Nikki.
I know.
That's what you should have in your bar.
Try Gigondas. It's
Yeah.
about the same but cheaper.
Oh, brilliant tip. Thank you, Tim.
Still not that cheap though, but
it's cheaper here.
Yes, cheaper than Chateauneuf de Pape, definitely.
You'll have to drink it on my
called me a
behalf,
brilliant
Tim.
tip.
What was that, Tim?
I thought Nikki called me a brilliant tit, but maybe not.
She did. Yeah.
Thank you, Nikki.
We all heard it. Everybody.
Let's keep that low.
That fits, wear it.
Mum and Dad say, why is Andrew not cooking your supper in the background?
I thought that as well.
Yeah, everything.
It's an outrage. I'm going to get him to cook me supper in the background later. He's doing work a bit early.
Antonio, give it up.
All right. Are there any other questions about anything? Going to just have a little look, see if there's anything else in my list of things that I haven't said though.
Where's the best place to order wine in a lockdown?
Oh God,
that's a great question. A great question.
Lidl. You can go to Lidl.
Yeah, they don't deliver, do they?
No, and you two are not allowed out. You're staying.
Oh no, we're frail and elderly.
Exactly. Stay in the house. Stay in the house.
Stay at home.
Certainly ordered online.
We're pre-morbid, which means that we're about to die.
We've got preconditions, which means we're very fussy about the wine that we drink.
I'm now looking for familial people. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, Ruth.
The best place to get wine from in a lockdown very much will depend on what you want to spend per bottle, how much you want to buy, and whereabouts you live. So nationally, there are.
We live in Elmdale, in case you've forgotten.
Places like the Wine Society, they're my favourite.
Wine Society, all right.
The Wine Society. You have to pay 50 quid to join, but that's for a lifetime. And then it's like not for profit.
Because when we're in France, we buy French wine.
When you're their age, dodgy.
That was with half a words came out then.
Sorry, I was just saying 50 quid for a lifetime membership is okay when you're young as you are, but when you're as old as we are, it's a bit more.
You're so ancient.
You can get an awful lot out of Lidl for 50 quid.
It's a great deal. We're all going to live for ages.
Enough for a lifetime.
Yeah, I might dodge the virus to go to Lidl for 50 quid.
So you just get Nikki to join, and then she can send them to you.
Probably won't want to do that.
Might make a nice birthday present.
But there's places like Naked Wine. They're still sending out wines. There's loads of locals. So if you're in Oundle, bet Amps would do you a case. But again,
no, they're not open.
Are they not open?
Oh,
I don't think so.
Is that Oundle or Arundel?
Oundle.
Oundle.
Hamptonshire.
I think Arundel
Yeah,
is Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yes, I know
We've
that.
run out of our French wine, as you may have gathered.
Yeah, that's where all this lot come from. They're all from Oundle.
Everyone's from Oundle.
They all went to Oundle.
They've all been in Lord of the Rings. I don't know.
I love it.
They're going to be in Lord
Carols of a middle class lockdown.
The middle class lockdown, but I still only want to pay little prices for my wine. Basically, we need to come and give you a little delivery, guys. That's what these are.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, that'd be great.
Where's your nearest?
Corby.
They probably deliver it.
Deliveroo it. I'd rather get French, you know, but
not little.
actually, the little in Roufette would be even better.
Yeah. How is the little in Roufette doing?
So if someone could just pop over on the ferry, that would be great.
Yeah.
Nice trip. The government really likes people doing that at the minute.
Got to count as essential supplies, surely.
Yeah.
Definitely in France. It's absolutely essential.
I bet in France actually nobody thinks twice about that being an essential thing.
No, absolutely. There's no question. No. You can't have a meal in France without a glass of wine.
What? It'll be like a pint of milk in the
Even
UK.
Meals on wheels to old people. They get a glass
don't
of
you
wine
have a
to
wine
take
man,
it.
like a milk man, that comes round every morning with the bottles?
Like Corona used to.
They've not closed the bottle banks, have they?
Goes well with the ventilator, is that what you said, Tim?
They used to do the bottles of Corona Fizzy. But
now
it's a whole different.
Yeah, you want any deliveries of Corona, do you?
Really?
So cheap with wine, thanks.
Just the wine. Just the wine.
Yes, please.
Hold the Corona.
Hold the Corona. Yeah. Do you get a bottle with your ventilator? That's what I want to know in France.
Oh, wow.
Gary?
Sorry. Sorry, Mary. I said
when you
something
made
wrong
Andrew
again.
shake his head, you know you've done something bad.
No, I liked it. I liked it.
Sorry.
Didn't know Andrew was there.
He kept on his
Mary
toes.
gets offended.
Amazing.
So give us a final word, Ruth. Give us a final word on Rose.
Final word. Yes.
Summary of the delight.
Person, what kind of
Sort of
person?
Trumpism.
Yeah, what kind of person drinks rosé?
So your very thoroughly modern man drinks rosé these days. When I first started working in wine, it was very rare for men to come in and purchase.
But Ted drinks anything.
Pink wines, but yeah, now it's a thoroughly modern man. It's always, I think, been the 18-year-old women that I was, and I think Becky was as well.
We've been there.
I have to say, in France, it's totally different. In France, you go into any bar, and the oldest man you've ever seen will be having a small glass of rosé.
Yes, I know.
Really? With the weather as well. I think
I like that.
There's so much
10 o'clock in the morning, usually.
I like
Always
that
me.
even more.
The large glass of rosé.
Our aunt and uncle live in the south of France, and they definitely like a bit of rosé.
There you go.
At 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Or even 9.
Possibly after 5 p.m. I'm not sure.
It's very much the breakfast wine of wines, if you were going
Yes.
to have a nice glass of rosé.
No, I've seen those old boys at 10 o'clock in the morning with a glass of rosé and chips
This wine. I've been looking for it all my life.
I think that should be your last word. It's the breakfast wine of wines.
Breakfast wine of champions, definitely.
Can't beat that one.
Will do us nicely.
Fabulous breakfast wine.
Excellent.
Right, but on that, I will disappear because I am getting a bit hungry. So if anybody does have any other questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. I will be.
Thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you once again.
Brilliant.
Again, Ruth.
Let us know the next
We have another one next time.
It's been a pleasure, guys. It's been lovely. Oh, that's a good question. I'm doing Beaujolais next Friday, but do let me know. You don't have to let me know now, but like just send me an email or whatever. Just if you have something else that you'd be interested in. As well.
Oh, I bought the Beaujolais now. You can't change it.
Oh no, that's happening. That's definitely happening.
All right.
We need to work out where we order the Beaujolais from, but we'll.
Yeah, what do we eat?
I'll bring you a Beaujolais.
What should we eat?
There's Andrew. Look, there he is.
What should we eat, Ruth?
Yay.
He heard someone mention dinner time.
What should we eat? Beaujolais.
Don't forget to tell people you do gin and beer as well.
Ruth,
Oh yeah, I was thinking I'd do a gin one. Oh, what was that, Nikki?
I think Tim was asking what we should eat with the Beaujolais.
Oh, with the Beaujolais, there's my favourite
Thank you,
recommendation
Nikki.
that I'm going to go for is crispy aromatic duck. However,
Oh,
so any kind of duck is nice.
aromatic duck.
And a
Duck.
variety
Oh.
of things.
Oh, my favourite.
Great.
We'll have to go.
But what I think I'll do with that one, because there's a nice website that recommends things to go with Beaujolais, because it's quite varied and duck's a bit special. Not everyone's going to want to eat duck. So what I think I'll do is I'll email around with the link, just a link to all the recipes that people recommend to go with it as well. So there's a bit of a
Hello, Andrew.
Bye.
Right, we're definitely going to go now.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you all. Have a good lockdown.
Leaving the meeting.
Bye, Nikki.
I don't know how to leave the meeting now then.